The Trump economy remains strong enough as 2020 fast approaches. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about the economy, gross domestic product numbers, and how that's going to play out as we head towards the 2020 presidential election cycle. Democrats obviously would hope that the economy doesn't perform well, because if the economy is doing well, the American people are not going to want to change horses midstream, and presidents with good economies tend to get reelected. So let's take a look at the numbers and see kind of where we stand heading into 2020. We have 2.1% growth in the second quarter of 2019. That came atop 3.1% growth in the first quarter. That's from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So with the slowdown slightly in the second quarter, that means that in order to get to, say, 3% growth for the year, you're going to need more growth in the third and the fourth quarters to catch up back to where you would have been. The economy hasn't grown above 4% since 2000, not above 3% since 2005. And this has coincided with many things: declining labor participation amongst working age adults, as well as that's about when China entered the WTO in the early 2000s, and U.S. manufacturing market share had been outsourced to China and overseas, such that we weren't producing as much here in America, as many goods. And so that's had an impact upon where we stand vis-a-vis growth. Again, we've not grown above 4% since 2000, not above 3% since 2005. Now in 2018, we got close at 2.93% growth, and that was the best year since 2005. So that was the first full year of the Trump tax cuts and deregulation policies. And with President Trump's push for stronger, better, fairer trade deals for the American people. And so we've reviewed the number: 3.1% for the first quarter, and then 2.1% for the second quarter. Now, what does that mean? How do we get to 3%? Can we beat 3%? Maybe this will be the first year since 2005. Well, I don't think that's going to happen. You need to get to 6.98% in the third quarter, and then you could finish out the year at 3%, and then you'll get to 3% for the year. But why is that? What do you mean? Isn't this if I get say 4% and then 2%, doesn't that average out in each of the quarters to 3% for an annual rate? And the answer is no, because they do not utilize the same formulas. Quarterly and annual rates are calculated quite differently. The quarterly rate, which is annualized, is a variant of the compound interest formula, whereas the annual growth rate is a simple growth rate, where you would take the and we're going to switch over to my Excel sheet here, because I want to show you how this is done. So the way the Bureau of Economic Analysis reports data is on the annual side and on the quarterly side. So let's first review the annual. The annual, they'll give you a nominal growth rate, and then they'll give you the so-called real GDP. Real GDP is the number that's reported. This is inflation adjusted, and that's the number we're going to be focused on here. And with real GDP, we came in at 2.93% in 2018, and again, that was better than 2015 at 2.91%. And so that was therefore the best year since 2005, which came in at 3.5%. So in order to get, and again, this is a simple growth rate. So to get to 3% for the year, you take 2019, you minus 2018, you divide it by 2018, and that'll get you to 3%. So we're shooting for a real GDP annual number of $19,197,346,000,000. That's what we need the real GDP to come out to. So how does this get calculated? What they do is they take the reported quarterly growth rates, each of the 4 quarters, and then they average them out. That's what that number is, the annual GDP number. So jumping down to, and I'll show you how this works. If you take Q1 to Q4, you get an average average real GDP of 18,638,150,000,000. All right, so now we go back up top here and we look at 2018. What was the reported growth number? There it is, 18,638,200,000,000. So they're rounding up here. The average rate that you want to see is actually 18,638,150,000,000. So if you take the 4 quarters, you average them out, and it gives you the annual number. So now to 2019, so now you can see where the problems start to come in here. You had in the first quarter 3.1% growth. And in the second quarter, we only got 2.1%. It's actually 2.05. And then they rounded up to 2.1. So when so we're shooting for 19 trillion, 197 billion, 346 million. You take your 4 for the first 2 quarters, and then we're projecting quarter 3 and quarter 4. Where do we have to get in order to get back on track for 3%? And so we can see here that you wind up with 19 trillion, 197 billion, 360 million. And so that's about where you want to be. And so to get there, we need 6.98% growth in the third quarter, and then you could do 3% growth in the fourth quarter, and then that'll get you to 3% for the year. But if you so you don't average out the quarterly growth rates, though, because that's not going to tell you what the annual number is. If you average out the quarterly growth rates here, you would actually get the 3.78% GDP for the year. And it's like, wow, that's really good. And it would be if you got almost 7% growth in the third quarter. That'd be huge, but that's probably not going to happen. And that's why it's difficult to get to 3% when you're not exceeding it dramatically on a reported rate. You want to get a simple growth rate of 3%, and we haven't done it since 2005. And 2018 was the best year we've seen since 2005, since before the financial crisis. And that owes to the different growth formulas that are utilized for each of the quarters. So if you look at the formula up here, you'll see it corresponds to what the Bureau of Economic Analysis says that you need to do. So we took those numbers, we plugged them into the Excel sheet, and then we plug in. We basically just keep on typing in growth numbers for the remaining quarters of the year to see where you need to get in order to get back on track for 3%. And unfortunately for this year, that means you're going to need almost 7% growth in the third quarter just to get back on track for a reported 3% growth rate for the annual. Now, you could get a revision on the second quarter. If it's dramatically revised upward, then the amount that you'll need for the third quarter will naturally come on down. But does that mean that the Trump economy is struggling? I don't think so. I think that the Trump economy is actually quite strong, and the GDP number is not, if it comes in at the 2.5%, for example, for 2019, I don't think that's going to hurt Trump's re-election chances one iota. And the reason for that is because unemployment is basically at a 50-year low. We're doing quite well at 3.7%. You have to go all the way back to the 1969, 1970 to get numbers that are that good. And that's really good numbers. I mean, who wants to see bad numbers? But you literally have to go back quite a ways to find numbers that are that low. And so 3.7%, if it's at 4% in 2020, Trump's going to say that that's full employment and the economy is doing much better than it was under Obama. And that will surely be true. Obama had much, much worse numbers than that. In 2012, when he was facing re-election, the unemployment rate was close to 8%. That's not as good as 3.7%. So, and then he has other numbers he can point to. 4.9 million jobs have been created since 2017, January, when President Trump came into office. You have the wages are doing really well as well, and they've been accelerating since 2017. and that they're at 2.8% growth in the first quarter of 2019. Those are good numbers. If you look at working age adults, that's an area of the economy that's definitely improving. We're seeing the growth we're seeing right now because working age adults 16 to 64 are re-entering the economy. So the population has increased by 1 million of 16 to 64-year-olds from 2016 to 2018. But the civilian labor force grew by 2.1 million. So labor participation is dramatically increasing in the Trump economy for working age adults. So we need to take a note here that this is excluding baby boomer retirees, which tend to kind of skew the reported labor participation rate. So if you want to get a good number about how are working age adults doing, you need to subtract out those who are 65 years and older. Very few of them work or are participating in the labor force anyways. People retire, they stop working. So they shouldn't be counting them. BLS, you should probably publish 16 to 64-year-old numbers so I don't have to calculate it every month. But that's what I'm here for. We're Americans for Limited Government. We want to know what's going on with the economy. And so we want to know working age adults because there's definitely a very good correlation between the working age population, labor participation, and economic growth. And so you can see on the chart here that as the resident population 14 to 64 is rising, the GDP numbers tend to rise on a nominal basis. And then as the numbers come back down for the working age population, then the GDP will go back down. So that means you want more working age adults entering the economy, specifically participating in the economy. If they're sitting on the sidelines, it doesn't do much, I think, to grow the economy because they're not participating in the economy. And so, but what does that mean? That means demographics are important. That means that in the future, if fertility rates are lower, you're going to expect to see fewer people on a growth basis entering the economy, and that's going to mean lower GDP numbers. And that certainly explains why we've been seeing declining GDP numbers since the turn of the century. Not above 4% since 2000, not above 3% since 2005. And certainly the growth rates of that you would expect to see in a growing economy are going to correspond with greater fertility. And then you wait 16 years later, and then people are entering the economy. But fertility is really low now. You're at 1.76 babies per woman, and that's less than 2. So that means the population is going to be declining. Other countries have faced similar challenges. Japan hasn't been above 2 babies per woman since 1975, and the population has been declining in Japan as a result. And so basically the economy's not been growing the economy's not been growing for like 20 years in Japan. There's only so much you can do when you don't have more people consuming goods and services, investing in businesses and that sort of thing. If it's the same number of people every year, well, then you're not going to see growth gains on the GDP side, which measures consumption, measures investment. You're just not going to see it. So does that mean that the 2.93% in 2018 is a good number? I think that's actually absolutely what it means. Given the lower rate of population growth that we're seeing, then you would expect to see lower GDP levels. So if you see a good number that's approaching 3%, it's not apples to apples compared to the 1980s or the 1990s. That's just the way it works. You can see wages increase, and that's another way you can see economic gain. So it's good that we're seeing wages growing. So that what I'm trying to say is that the employment numbers, the job creation numbers, the wage numbers, these are more important to the pocketbooks of the American people. And I would argue they're more important to the economy than the reported GDP numbers. What I did here was I took BLS projections of working age populations going forward to say 2050. And as the population is expected to grow slower, then we should expect the economy to grow a little bit slower. But the GDP number is not the make or break for the economy. You want to see low unemployment rates. After the financial crisis, unemployment went really high. Now it's really low. We're practically at peak employment here, and hopefully that continues for some time. We'd like to see Americans get their 401ks and IRAs. We want to see those numbers going up. People want to make money and be profitable and be prosperous, and that's just where we are. And getting working age adults into the economy is absolutely the way to do that. Ivanka Trump, President Trump's daughter, is an advisor to President Trump, and she's been focused on this like a laser beam to get labor participation to increase amongst working age adults and get more people into the economy. So where can you have more people entering? Well, men work at greater rates than women. So if more women are entering the workforce, then you could see more gains in that direction. And so we're seeing, and across the board, in every category except for 16 to 24, you're seeing working age adults increased labor participation. So 25 to 34 has gone up from 82.2% to 82.9%. 35 to 44-year-olds, 82.6 to 83.4%. 45 to 54, 79.9 to 81.4%. Participation. 55 to 64 has increased from 64.2 to 65.5%. So these are all great numbers, and this is all during the Trump economy, and that's great news. And so and we've spoken about the fertility issues. So some people think that if we just do more immigration, then you could offset any fertility problems demographically that you're facing. And surely the white non-Hispanic population hasn't been growing at all in the past year. It's much slower in that regard. You're basically flat in terms of and that's the biggest demographic, the white non-Hispanic population. So and if you look at immigration and the average age of people who are coming here, they're like over 40. And so as Mexico fertility is similarly declining, you're going to see you'd expect that immigrants, if they're older and they're bringing their fathers, their grandfathers, that you're not going to see as much fertility even from the immigrant populations. And this is fertility in Mexico. It's down to 2.15 babies per woman. And that's been declining for years. And some countries have greater fertility than others, but they're all moving in the same direction. Eventually, the population overall, globally, is going to start declining. And you're just going to kind of stabilize the population. Used to be people were worried about the population bomb. Well, now we're worried about demographic decline. And kind of a stagnation that comes with that. And so how do you combat that? What can you do to get more people to participate in the economy? How can we alter expectations for how much the economy can grow? President Trump said he'd like to get to 3% or 4% economic growth. And these trends in demographics make that extremely difficult. You could see another baby boom, and then in 15 years after it, we'll be seeing greater growth, I would expect. But immigration, if the average age of people immigrating to the United States is much higher, it's not like they're 20, but they're much older. That's not going to really do much to boost labor participation. So I think that immigration alone is not going to solve this problem. There should be more. People should be talking more about demographic impacts and what can we do to encourage marriage? What can we do to encourage young Americans to raise families and that sort of thing? That I think is and you're going to want more skilled labor. So I think that as we go forward into future years and future generations, we make sure that we're having enough children. As a society, it's something that I think that people don't talk enough about, but we ought to be, because it's one of the biggest ways that we're going to grow the economy. Now switching to the politics of 2020, The current numbers Trump's seeing on jobs, wages, and economic growth, they're all better than what Obama had, former President Obama, when he was getting reelected in 2012. Unemployment, again, was 7.8%, and not the last reported number before 2012. The wages were not growing at all. GDP wound up coming in at 2.2% for 2012. So the numbers were slowly improving, though, and so that was good enough to get 4 more years. So if you're going to compare the Trump economy to the Obama economy, the Trump economy is great. Objectively speaking, people are working, unemployment's really low, wages are rising. This is what's going to determine if people feel comfortable with the state of affairs, I think, heading into 2020. And so I'll leave you with the close here. Trump can make the case that what he's doing to help the economy grow even faster by bringing production back to the U.S. with better trade deals. You have the USMCA, Mexico-Canada-U.S. trade agreement before Congress. Trump is continuing his tough approach with China to create pressure via tariffs to bring business back to the United States. And so I think Trump's doing what he can to help the economy grow. The point is, in past re-election cycles, pocketbook issues have always loomed. The American people are prudent and frugal, too. And as the old saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a great day.